Welcome everyone to CGHE seminar number 227. It's quite a lot, isn't it? And our topic today is stability and change in academic work and departments. And we will have the interesting proposition to consider that academic units don't change quite as much as we sometimes think they might, which, depending on your point of view, may be a good or a bad thing. Maybe it depends on what you want them to change to. And to help us through that interesting topic, we have Brendan Cantwell and Matt Grossman. We're bringing Matt in, we hope. His connection is still being set up. There he is. Excellent. So we have both our speakers are with us. Let me take you through the webinar protocols and then I'll introduce them. Now, the webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on the CG website pretty soon, usually within a day or so. And of course, that takes you to YouTube, where we're finding that a lot of people are looking at our past webinars. So this discussion will continue into the next few weeks in that sense. Now, please keep yourself muted unless you have been asked to speak or ask a question. There's no need to have your video or your audio on during the webinar, but please do so when we bring you into the Q&A. We recommend using the speaker view so you can more clearly see who is talking. That speaker view command is in the top right hand of the Zoom screen. Now, to develop a role in the Q&A, to ask a question or to make a statement after the speakers have done their presentation, which should be around about halfway through the hour, use the chat function. Bring your ideas forward in the chat and then we'll be able to select you into the Q&A part. Good idea to come in fairly early because we're finding that some of the best Q&A ideas come forward in the last 5 minutes and we've run out of speaking time. We can't fit you in. So do get cheeky and push forward early, and then you'll be in the Q&A. The chat function is important. It's a way you can discuss things with each other during the presentation, and remember that the chat function will also be a record. It'll be available on our website. So what you say there remains on the record. I'm really delighted to introduce Brendan Campbell and Matt Grossman. Now, Brendan is an associate professor in the Department of Educational Administration and coordinator of the Higher Adult and Lifelong Learning Education Unit at Michigan State University in the United States. He's also joint editor-in-chief of the journal Higher Education. And I declare a personal interest here in the sense that I am also one of the joint editors-in-chief of the same journal. And he comments on a range of matters. He's got a recent co-edited handbook in the Edward Elgar series, I think it is, on the politics of higher education. He writes about the political economy of the sector, and he writes about global issues as well. Matt Grossman is director of the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research and professor of political science at Michigan State University. He's also a senior fellow at the Niskanen Center and a contributor at 538, an incisive political commentary in that periodical. His books include How Social Science Got Better. It sounds very encouraging, Matt. You must tell us more. Red State Blues, Asymmetric Politics, Artists of the Possible, The Not So Special Interests, and Campaigns and Elections. And he hosts the Science of Politics podcast. Really look forward to your contributions, Brendan and Matt, and we start, I think, with Brendan.
Thanks very much. I'm going to share my screen and go through some slides, and then I'll hand it over to Matt, and I'll probably keep the share screen going, Matt, and just advance for you if that works. Okay. No, it's not what I want to share. How do we get this right? That's right. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
See that?
Very good. So I want to We're going to talk today about a paper that Matt and I have co-authored with Caleb Lucas, who's not able to be here today, and that is currently in review, that looks at the stability of academic departments in the United States. But I want to start by contextualizing that paper, our paper, in wider trends. And so we can consider the worldwide trends that are discussed in the literature about change in higher education. One of them is manifestly true, which is that there has been tremendous enrollment growth around the world in higher education in just about every country. All middle and high income countries now see high rates of participation. Coincident with that, we see the diffusion of the Euro-American Research University model as the dominant organizational model in higher education globally. There's, of course, texture and nuance to that claim, but that's a fairly standard observation. Increased research activity. So governments are increasingly interested in their higher education sector producing research outputs, and academic careers and universities are interested in academic staff being engaged in research. There is intensified competition through rankings and metrics and markets within and between countries, and there's accountability for social and economic responsiveness from the higher education sector. That leads to particular sorts of experiences within universities and academic departments. New public management and academic capitalism have been described, theorized, and tested empirically. And these concepts indicate that academic managers are actively prioritizing some areas of work, particularly in STEM fields, business, those fields closest to markets and jobs, and redirecting resources to reflect those managerial preferences. Those are also often the preferences of government officials, policymakers. Academics also describe experience an increased pace of work and growing expectations. There's this idea that you have to work more, you have to work faster, you have to produce more and better outputs. And there's quite a bit of pressure pushed down on individual academics to perform. Oftentimes we think about this through audit cultures and other cultures of performance. And then there's also growing precarity and uncertainty in academic careers, difficult job market for new graduates, for new PhD graduates. And the jobs that are available are often contingent on short-term contracts and dependent on grant income. And this is something that we see in the United States, but also in many countries around the world, this sort of growing precarity of academic work. I'm going to focus just a little bit on the US and point to this idea that there is, the system is highly marketized, right? This has been long observed. Burton Clark, for example, put the United States in his famous coordinating triangle closest to the market. That there are strong administrations in US colleges and universities relative to the strength of faculties and to students. And that academic capitalism management is a prominent feature of the way that the organizations are run and the system is governed. There is growing public discontent with higher education. We see poll after poll showing that public trust in higher education has diminished, that people think that higher education is not doing a good enough job to prepare people for work, that it's too costly. There's also a big partisan divide in the public perception of higher education, where people who identify as Republicans or political conservatives in large majorities believe that higher education is too liberal or pushing a liberal agenda. Another aspect of US higher education that relates to our topic is this idea of a new faculty majority. It's often cited that something like 2/3 or 75% of faculty in the United States are now off the tenure track. They don't have the possibility of accruing tenure. And there's this belief that arts, humanities, and some social sciences are widely disfavored by policymakers, by university administrators. And we've also seen, if you look at the pages of the Chronicle of Higher Education or many of the other periodicals Forbes and Bloomberg like these kind of headlines, this idea that there's going to be massive collapse of higher education, right? That large swaths of the sector are going to close, or that many programs are going to close. So this is the sort of perception of what's going on in US higher education. But then there are recent studies, several good recent studies by historians, by sociologists, by economists, that point to really quite a lot of stability in the US higher education landscape. That US higher education has progressively expanded over time, that it's certainly changed, but that change comes with stability, and that the sector has this ability to absorb new activities without dispensing of existing ones, and that the faculty market and tenure system in the US is actually pretty strong comparatively when you look at other countries, and it sustains a strong research system. And just descriptively, I want to show just a couple of slides showing how this stability, what this stability looks like. So this is total enrollment in the US from 1970 to 2019. And you see it's progressively gone up with the exception of a little climb after the Great Recession, following a little dip. And the share of enrollments in various sectors has remained pretty constant. There was a ramp up in the 2000s of private for-profit enrollments, but that has eased off a bit. And basically we see the control of the system and enrollments in the system looking pretty stable over time. The same thing when we look at the difference between 2- and 4-year colleges, really just quite a lot of stability. Most enrollment is in the 4-year sector, and the distribution of 4- and 2-year enrollments has remained remarkably stable over like a 40-year period. Again, we see the same kind of growth and stability picture when we look at the share of degree awards by degree level, right? There's a big to-do right now in the US media about master's degrees. Are they scams? The implication is that master's degrees have just really taken off, but there's not much evidence of that. And then when we look at the number of institutions by control and type, we see, again, remarkable stability. The one exception, of course, is the sort of rise and fall of for-profit institutions in the last 20 years. And then also a little bit of rise and fall over a longer period of the community college sector, both four-year and both for-profit and nonprofit. But in general, you look at these non-profit 4 years, which are the sector that's anticipated to collapse, a great deal of stability. How is this playing out inside universities? That's the question that Matt and I address in the paper. Does the overall picture of stability and growth translate within academic departments? Are we seeing a lot of shifting within these universities that we don't see from the sort of high-level view? And what we did is we examined change in academic departments in terms of the number of faculty, tenure system, full-time faculty appointments within academic departments using a database provided by the firm Academic Analytics. We have 30,000, almost 31,000 academic departments nested in 330 universities, and we do a time series panel regression to look at the correlates of change within those departments. And we test for active managerial prioritization, which is what's assumed in the sort of organization literature, the qualitative literature on faculty work. We test for market logics, whether we see a shift into growing fields, faculty appointments in fields with lots of grant activity, whether publications and citations are being rewarded by academic managers. Maybe they're just following academic logics, or maybe there's just organizational inertia, a path dependence, where the organizational types that exist, the organizational structure is kind of reproduced and replicated. The academic analytics database is limited, so we check our findings with federal data and look at change in disciplinary composition of academic staff and the correlates of that as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Matt. I'll put myself on mute, and Matt, I'll try and work the slides for you.
All right, thanks so much. Yes, we have academic analytics as our source of university department level data. I think we can't see it anymore, Brendan. There we go. We have federal data for the sort of broad trends across disciplines nationally. So this is just a first step to look at stability. We have the change from one year to the next in the number of research faculty, overwhelmingly tenure track faculty, at departments at American research universities. And of course, the first thing that you'll notice is that most departments do not change a lot from one year to the next in the size of their faculty. Overwhelmingly, they either stay exactly the same from one year to the next in their faculty count, or they go up or down one or possibly two. You really don't see a whole lot of year-to-year dramatic changes in the size of faculty. That shouldn't be all that surprising in that we don't have faculty retiring en masse or being hired en masse at most universities. Even if we take this out 2 years, which is our normal count, you see basically the same distribution, a little bit wider, but it's not the case that everybody who's up one the first year is up one the next year, and so that distribution kind of doubles. Instead, you see some rises and falls across universities. So we also wanted to take a look at the change across different types of disciplines. So we have every individual department in the data set, but this is a summary in some broad categories that people use to talk about the rise and fall of disciplines. And this is the average number of department faculty at a university in a department in each of these broad fields. And so you can see it ranges from 16 to 24 or so across these fields. So there are some differences in sizes. Arts departments are smaller. Natural and physical science departments and engineering departments are larger on average at US universities. But you don't see a ton of change. There was a bit of a fall following the Great Recession and some changes in university funding, especially at state universities. You've seen a bit of a rise back since then, but really mostly a picture of stability. We also wanted to look at some things that might be driving some changes across disciplines and in the relative weight that universities put on these different subjects and fields. And one potential indicator is to look at the publication process. We know that departments are certainly encouraged to publish. We know there's a proliferation of academic journals. And so we wanted to know if that might be driving some university decision-making. And again, you see mostly stable differences across fields. The arts and humanities publish less than do the natural and physical sciences. You see more of an increase in the number of articles. So this is the number of articles published by a department in a given year. And so you can see there's a pretty steady increase in article production. Now, the academic analytics counts any author, so some of this could just be rising co-authorship rather than rising number of total publications. But you can see that that is mostly occurring in the sciences. Not a lot of change in the sort of hierarchy of the disciplines for publishing over time. Another factor that is sometimes pegged is that universities are chasing the money. They're interested in grants, and we're able to look at that as well. And what we find is that there was a bit of an overall dip in the number of grants in some fields, but no change in the hierarchy. It's the natural sciences that get most of the grant dollars, and the medical sciences. And the social sciences and humanities do not get a lot of grants. So that's not surprising to anybody. You might expect that that might mean that universities are incentivized to direct faculty toward these grant producing fields. And so we wanted to look at that. We also have this other source of data, though, which is the national data on faculty employment from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is the survey that produces the unemployment statistics. And so it's a very broad survey of the American public. And that means it's a different composition. It's going to be everybody who classifies themselves as a university teacher or faculty member and in a given field. And so we don't get that within university information that we have from our other data, but we have broader coverage. We're including a lot of those academics that are maybe more precariously connected to the university systems, or anybody who is counting themselves as a university teacher or faculty member. And this is the year-to-year change in the faculty count of a given discipline. So here we don't have the university level. We just have how many people are employed in that discipline, or say they're employed in that discipline in any given year, and then the next. And here what you see is a picture of slow growth. So it's slightly different than the picture at the university level. In most fields, we see in any given year an increase in the number of people that are employed in that field, but not by huge changes, right? We're not seeing a field grow incredibly quickly. These, of course, can build on each other over time. We have a longer time series for this data. And so you do see some, you get a wider distribution if you went to say a 2-year window versus a 1-year window. So this is what that data looks like if you look at a number of people who say they're employed in each field in each year. And here you see a little bit more change. We actually have this data going back a little further, but here we're just going from the 1990s. And what we see is that you do see that sort of rise and decline in the humanities. Our categories are a little bit different here based on how the Bureau of Labor Statistics characterizes people's responses. But here we see a bit of rise and decline of humanities and arts positions. We also see a very different hierarchy. That is, we see that it isn't the sciences that are dominating total employment in the university sector, because now we're expanding to community colleges and to people who are not tenure track faculty. You don't see a whole lot of decline here, though. That is, the decline that you do see is after a long rise, and so it doesn't seem to be the case that any of these broad fields is in a broad multi-decade decline. The benefit of this data is that we're also able to connect it to enrollment, some of those trends that Brendan spoke about. Just to review, the academic analytics data is used by universities, research universities, and so its metrics are focused on research and grant dollars, as we showed you. They don't have stuff on student credit hours or degrees. Whereas we're able to connect these fields at the national level with trends in degrees. This is associate's degrees and bachelor's degrees by these same broad fields as best as we could connect them. And what we see is that there's actually a big increase in humanities associate's degrees. That's mainly in these liberal studies and English, some more general departments in these 2-year degrees. And there are some big increases in communication and in the life sciences in bachelor's degrees overall. So these may not show up in the research university sector that we're focused on in the academic analytics analysis, but they are sort of part of the story of American higher education. That is, we might see universities chasing where students want degrees rather than just where the research output is. So we wanted to assess that possibility as well. We also wanted to explain this stability, though, that we see across these academic fields and within universities. And I think a big factor here is just that these are pretty stable, long-lasting careers. So one thing we're able to do with the academic analytics data is look at when people, we don't have age, but we do have when people got their PhD and the current year. And so we know in an average, how long have most people been employed with a doctorate in a university? And what we find is that in the average department, we see a bit of an increase over time, but also a lot of stability. So in these natural science departments, The average faculty member has been more than 20 years, about 23 years now almost, but since their PhD. Or since their terminal degree. So that is quite a long time to be employed as a faculty member for the average in a department. There's also some stable differences across fields. Here, the social sciences are mostly young by comparison to the natural sciences. And we do see some change over time. In the arts, for example, we see a rise in our data just in a decade or so, from below 20 to 21.5. So that does give us some support for this kind of aging of the faculty pool story of academic departments. So one reason we could have stability is that universities are rewarding the same departments or just keeping departments of stable size. But another reason we might have stability is just because there aren't a lot of retirements and universities aren't changing much unless there's a large number of retirements. Another way of looking at the same data is just the distribution by faculty rank. In the US, we go by assistant before tenure, associate right after tenure, and then full or just professor. And the average academic department has almost half of their faculty in that professor category. So they've advanced twice. And assistant professors are still the minority and the lowest category. So we're tracking tenure track professors here. They are distributed, but there isn't a lot of change, and there's a lot of older faculty who have already been through the tenure process, and not very many in any given year who are at the assistant level. All right, so now we're taking a bit of a leap in that we're kind of trying to figure out whether we can assess the dynamics of these changes over time. And we did run this in multiple ways. What you're looking at here is to have a two-way fixed effects between disciplines and years at individual universities. And so here what we're looking at, and we did it with a 2-year lag and a 1-year lag, you're looking at the 2-year lag here. And so what we're trying to figure out here is not just those broad trends nationally, but within universities, are universities responding to the size of the faculty in their departments, the publication output of their faculty, or the grants produced by their faculty. We also have a citation indicator from academic analytics. And so we also put that in some of the models that you are seeing. And so the broad trends are, of course, as you saw, most of the time what's happening is we're just replicating the faculty that we had in 2 years ago in any given year. But there is at least some evidence that university departments are being rewarded for publication output, both articles and even books. We checked because there's a story that humanities decline might be driven by aversion to book-driven disciplines. That does not seem to be true in our data. However, there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence that highly cited departments are being rewarded with faculty. So this could be a story of sort of quantity over quality being rewarded at academic departments. And we don't see a lot of evidence either in number of grant dollars or grants that academic departments that receive the bulk of the funding are being rewarded with new faculty lines. So although that might be the impression, it is supported at the university level in our data. Now that could again be because we're kind of taking out the national level year-to-year trends here and looking at within university trends, but we'll have a way of assessing that in a moment. So now we're in the realm of trying to figure out, based on our models, what kinds of effects these different metrics might have. And I don't want to take this overwhelmingly seriously, but I think the main thing that you want to take away from this is that even the effects that we do find are relatively small. That is going from having no publications in a year to a department having 100 publications in a year. And remember, we're talking about faculty sizes in the range of 20. So that would be a lot of additional publications in an academic department. And we're talking about that maybe being worth one additional faculty member. So faculty members might be rewarded for production, but we would have to get to insane levels of production at the end of our graph here to predict big changes in departments' faculty sizes. We also try to do a similar kind of analysis with just the national level data. So here we're just looking at disciplines, how many faculty are employed in disciplines in any given year over a longer time period with the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what we're able to do here is incorporate some of the educational data, the degree data, and we don't find a lot of evidence that overall disciplines are gaining when they are associated with degree production. We again have a different measure of grants for nationwide grants allocated to each discipline. And there again, we don't show any evidence that the disciplines that are gaining are those that are getting more grant dollars. Instead, mostly what's going on here is just a continuation of existing trends and existing faculty counts in any given discipline. So there's not sort of an obvious story here of universities either responding to the educational logic or the grant logic. There's some evidence that they might be responding to academic production, but mostly what they're doing is staying about the same as they were in a prior year. So I think maybe it's a good time to stop now. And then this is some data from my new book on the social sciences that we can get to if we have time.
Well, thank you both for that very interesting data presentation. And it's already sparking some questions. I'd like to bring in Jelena Brankovic first. I think she's posing the question which I had in mind also. Jelena, are you there?
Just a moment. Hi, everyone. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I was just typing the question because I had a line of comments in the chat so far. So basically, I think the whole situation with the stability of departments is very interesting. And now, given the findings related to the stability also of the employment in the case of the US, I found it very interesting to contrast with the recent trends in some of the European countries in which we have something of an opposite situation, I would think. Now, I'm not sure really to what extent that is comparable. However, I was wondering whether we actually do talk, can we talk about some kind of a paradox here, whereby in the case of Europe, we have a strong role of the state, and we have the role of the state as a kind of a maybe historical protector of the universities from the market. But at the same time, it seems that universities are actually not really enjoying this kind of protection from the market compared to the employment prospects of the researchers. So I'm not very sure how to interpret that. Whether this is something that that does tell us something of this relationship or not.
So I'll make a speculative response. One, I think it's kind of hard to compare, and I think analysis within country or within region is necessary to begin to do meaningful comparisons. I think the structure of the academic career is quite different in different countries, and that can explain part of these differences. But I actually wonder if things are all that different, because what we haven't captured here are growth in, for example, postdoc appointments in the United States, which have grown quite a lot over the since the 1990s, for example. And so it may be that as US departments don't expand much, as they stay the same, and as faculty members get older and and stay in their jobs, right? That what we're seeing is something closer to a European model in the US, where the stability is, in a sense, what produces the precarity, because things aren't changing in departments. So people are getting jobs that aren't registering as faculty jobs necessarily. And the old professors are sticking around, and you have to wait for one of them to die to get a new job, right? So it may be that this is actually the U.S. sort of model moving more close to what we see as the sort of stereotype of the model in Europe. So that's a quick, perhaps unsatisfying response, but that's a quick response.
Well, a couple things I just wanted to clarify are that we also show that, you know, most people who say that they're employed as faculty members are not in this research university data that we have from academic analytics. If you look at the BLS data, most of the people who say they're academics in a discipline are not in the totals by research universities. So we also show that that difference. It's just we show more continuity there, that they're you know, that's always been the case and kind of continues to be the case. There are some interesting stories since I didn't get to the social sciences part, when you look at specific disciplines. So for example, anthropology is a discipline where most of the people who are anthropologists are employed by research universities, whereas psychology is an example where most of the people are not. There's a lot of people at two-year institutions and non-research universities. So even within the same kind of broad category, you can get very different disciplinary situations. And we also can still show that from the perspective of, say, someone on the academic job market, it can still feel like there's an overproduction of doctoral degrees relative to the number of available spots. That is certainly true, and we're doing nothing to undermine that story, other than to say that part of what might be driving it is that these academic careers are quite long, and if anything, are getting longer.
Thank you both. I'd like to bring in Vincent Carpentier at this point. Vincent.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Many thanks for your presentation. It was really, really interesting. I just wanted to ask you, in the indication about the impact of the 2008 crisis. I mean, in relation to the aggregated data, I couldn't see like a real turning point, but I could see like the for-profit, sector being like severely affected. But I was wondering whether there's been like a differential impact in relation to different kind of institution, by states, by type of ownership, research, teaching. If you could give us an indication of this. Thank you.
So I can say a little bit something about that. I think that the impact of the 2008 financial crisis turned out to be both pretty severe within colleges and universities, and in the sort of longer medium term and across the sector, maybe less impactful than you might think, right? So it was true that individual campuses faced pretty severe budget restrictions. And while there was a federal stimulus package at the time that helped universities, it did not prevent pretty painful cuts, some layoffs, some additional drift towards adjunct faculty. But you saw differential capabilities to respond. So particularly the research university sector was able to grow enrollments, oftentimes by taking enrollments away from other sectors, and also by being able to grow international enrollments, right? This was a pretty standard strategy for large public universities, large public research universities. Total sector employment dipped a little bit after the 2007-2008 recession, but then rebounded pretty quickly, and higher education grew as an employment sector. Now, whether those are good stable, high-paying jobs is another question, but it grew. The thing that's really noticeable is what's happening to community colleges, a trend that is accelerated since the pandemic, but began sort of in the years after the financial crisis, where you saw this normal counter-cyclical response with people sort of returning to school, rushing into education, and they went into the community colleges and the for-profit sector. And then at around 2010, that peaked and began to decline quite precipitously. You also see a bunch of two-year colleges, community colleges, doing conversions into being classified as baccalaureate granting institutions because they start offering four-year degrees. So that's also part of this shift. And what we see really, I think, is strong social demand for the traditional degree. The four-year degree is really what people want, despite a lot of the policy discussion about vocational degrees and short-term certificates. And, you know, Biden has a proposal to make community college free. That's kind of policymakers trying to nudge people into making decisions that people might not actually want to make. And so I think that what we really see is growing after the 2008 is just the four-year traditional providers are kind of strengthened relative to other providers in the sector. And that's the biggest change. Sorry if that was a long-winded response.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Brendan. I think long-winded but interesting. Lots of data there. Phil Altbach. Phil, can you come in, please?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, gentlemen, for really interesting presentation. I had my main question is the data that you're presenting seems to be from the research university sector in the US, which, as we all know, is a relatively small part of the total American higher education system. A, is that true? And B, I wonder if you could reflect on what's the situation of the faculty in the non-research university sector and how does that affect things? And are some of these institutions being, how to put it, encouraged to do more research, to sort of up their game to areas where they may not be well qualified to do that, et cetera. And then a kind of a comment and maybe a request for speculation based on Brendan's last comments. The so-called decline of community colleges in the United States has been quite puzzling to me and to many people. I wonder if you might reflect a little bit more about that, because it also would have international kind of implications, maybe, in terms of how vocational sectors in other countries may be doing. So thanks, gentlemen.
So just to clarify, the academic analytics data that we have is just from research universities. The Bureau of Labor Statistics data that we have is not. It's from anybody who classifies themselves as a university or college teacher in a particular discipline. So we're kind of trying to get at that difference with the two different analyses, but we don't have institution level data beyond the research university sector. So we can't say how these other types of institutions are allocating their faculty beyond the national trends, which is that it doesn't seem to be in response to overall grant dollars in a discipline or overall degree production, including associate degree production. One thing I'll just say on the last part is that people might, the community college sector might be portrayed as a vocational education, but that's not really what most people are getting their degrees in. It's actually mostly sort of pre-college, pre-four-year degree preparation kinds of programs. And so we get a lot of degrees in general studies or in the humanities, even in our data.
And I'll just add that it's true that the research university sector is tiny in terms of number of institutions, right? relative to the total number of of colleges and universities, but they tend to be much, much bigger, right? You know this. And they also tend to employ many more faculty members than other institution types. So they're a tiny percentage of total campuses, total institutions, but they're a bigger share of enrollments and faculty employment. Not representative, of course, but more meaningful in terms of national share.
And the disciplinary trends are not necessarily the same, right? So we see these big increases in business and communications and computer science in the both in four-year degrees and university faculty at research universities, but that we don't necessarily see those same kinds of trends in the two-year degree or the overall BLS data, where you see more health professions increasing.
Well, thank you both for responding as you did to Phil. I'm going to bring in Andres Bernasconi in a moment, but I might ask you a question myself before that. In a number of countries, there are trends to a split in the old teaching research nexus defining faculty positions, so that you get more research only positions, and the growth also of teaching specified positions, even in research intensive universities. Are there any signs of those trends in the US? Are we seeing an increase in proportional terms in targeted jobs like that, research only or teaching only?
I'll jump in. Maybe Matt has some observations, but basically no, I don't think so. Except that many of the non-tenure track jobs, which are a growing share of the available jobs, right, of the available new jobs, and non-tenure track could be sort of getting paid a pretty small wage to teach a class, you know, a sort of per class arrangement, or it could actually be a stable job with expectations of continued employment over multi-year contracts, right? Those are different. There's pretty wide variation in non-track jobs. And so those jobs are, are for teaching usually. Sometimes there's some administration and service, or maybe even some small research expectations in those jobs. But generally, we don't see in the sort of traditional faculty job a split between teaching and research appointments. We see the bundled appointment as the sort of normal tenure track kind of appointment. I think this gets in part to Phil's observation that there may be changes in expectations at different institution types. So that kind of divide, because the United States has this, use the Carnegie classification as a default, this differentiated system with different missions, quite different from like the UK's unitary system of universities, where some institutions are doing teaching focus, liberal arts colleges, for example. Some have a more research focus. There are some kind of in the middle between those mission focuses. And I do think that you're seeing a pressing down of research expectations. This has been discussed for a long time into the non-research university sector. So if anything, with the sort of ordinary tenure track job, rather than seeing a rationalization of teaching and research as maybe different job categories, you were seeing a less rationalization of those differences by institution type as the research expectations ratchet up for everybody.
Thank you. I'd like to bring in Andres Bernasconi now, please. Andres.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Brendan and Matt, for sharing your paper with us. My question was more of a methodological type of question, and it relates to the 2-year window of opportunity for change in the size of departments. You would really need to be a very gifted academic administrator to affect change in the size of the department over a 2-year period, a type of David Copperfield magician, to make people appear or disappear at will, even over a period of 5 years. So I wonder if the measurement is a bit too short to see the type of change you are testing. That's so one comment. And the other thing is that maybe what administrators are doing is changing what they can change, which is not the number of faculty members in a department, but in fact, not hiring any more people into the tenure track.
Right. So we did try to look at longer lags, and we didn't see any differences in the relationships between those variables. But we definitely take the point that some people asked us for a 1-year lag, and we were trying to figure out how that could even be achieved. So yes, I do think it will take longer. And you see in some of the trends, some evidence that there's kind of longer term shifts in allocation, but we didn't see much evidence of responsiveness to those factors that we could track over longer time windows beyond the ones that you saw, that larger departments and those with more publications are rewarded regardless of the lag that you use.
Thanks, Matt. I'd like to bring in Peping Pedro now. Peping, for your first question on the CG webinar. Now you're muted, I think. We're not hearing anything.
Yes, sir. Good. Here in the Philippines, it's good evening, but to the rest of the world, good day or good afternoon. Okay, my question upon showing the slide a while ago by one of our speaker, seems like that the different findings of the study, that some courses are declining and some courses are increasing. Now, my question is, what will be the possible impact on instability for the different university or colleges in US about the field of study? We understand that the different colleges and university in US offers different field of specialization. Now, my question is, what will be the impact if in case the courses being offered is declining or increasing?
So I think we can think about this impact in different ways, and the way that we think about it can partially shape the answer to the question, right? So one of the fields that have grown quite a lot in recent years in the research university sector that we're able to show are business communications fields. I think that this is pretty common. Business studies, media communications are popular degrees everywhere in the world now, I think. And one of the consequences of that might be that the faculty members in those fields, which are not growing as fast as the enrollments, they might have lots of large number undergraduate courses to teach, right? And so there may be, whereas in other fields where degree production and student affiliation is either stable or ebbing a little bit, they may not have the same influx of new students, right? So that could change the sort of quality of jobs within an individual institution based on what department you're in. You've got all these students, we got to manage these students. So that's one possible difference. The other thing is that you can, I think that what we kind of see in the national data, and I'll let Matt say more about this, is a kind of paradoxical shift where the 4-year type institutions, the research university type institutions, are moving more and more into vocational is not quite the right word, but job-related fields, right? Fields that have clear employment outcomes, or at least students and families think they have clear employment outcomes, versus in the community colleges where they're doing more of the sort of basic liberal education kind of work that may be preparing students to transfer to a 4-year institution, or it may be just being done for it, for the associate's degree's sake. So that's another potential consequence.
Okay, can I have one follow-up question, sir, and relevant to my question?
Go ahead.
Okay, yes. My follow-up question is, what will be the possible implication for those universities or colleges in terms of faculty, if in case enrollees drop or decreases? What will be the possible impact to the faculty if is there any support from the educational institution given that the enrollees are dropped or declining?
Well, we sort of see surprisingly little responsiveness to enrollment overall. That is, university departments, university fields don't seem to be gaining or losing based on their total degrees awarded. There are these long-term trends. So, for example, in the social sciences, there is a move toward applied disciplines, communications, business, et cetera. But it's pretty slow and long term. There are some counteracting tendencies like education and public administration are in decline as a share of degrees. And faculty. One of the big trends that I actually noticed that I think might explain some of the conversation in the social sciences is that these applied disciplines started to produce doctorates. And what that has meant is that a whole bunch of faculty positions that likely were open to the core social sciences before are now less open to the core social sciences and are now being filled by graduates of those same doctoral programs. So because we've had sort of a professionalization across disciplines, that might mean that to say sociology or economics doctoral graduate, there's actually less opportunities, even though we're showing the sort of stability in the careers in that particular field. But that might be because of the expansion of doctorates from other programs. We also do have some capacity to look at kind of full-scale changes like the closure of a department or the creation of a new department, or in our data that just shows up as a huge new number of people versus none, or a large group versus almost none. But those are pretty rare in our data, and the ones that you do see tend to be reclassifications that weren't very far from the original discipline. So there is some of that going on, but we hear about the big cases, I would say, in the media. And so it could be that we've sort of overplayed how much universities, to the previous point about how much is under university administrators' control, how much they really can say, let's close this department, let's reopen this new department. That's going to be relatively rare.
Okay, can I have one more last question,
sorry,
sir?
I'm sorry. No, Pepping, no, you've asked 2 questions. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you,
We've got
sir.
3 more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The habit is hard to break once you get talking. Colleagues, we're running out of time, but we've got 3 more questions. And what I'd like to do is bring all the questions in together and then ask you to make a final wrap-up response to those questions and to say anything you want to say at the end of what's been a very interesting webinar. First question is from, so hold your responses until you've heard all 3. First question is from C. Sanger.
Yes, hello there. I wondered what's the future for tenured positions in US universities? They appear to have largely disappeared within UK universities.
So the big question about long-term of tenure, that's the first question. The second question is from Soyoung Lee.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for your presentation. So my question is, I think I saw some increases in the article numbers and student degrees in some disciplines such as business and natural sciences, but stability, consistent stability in grant, faculty number, and job count, regardless of disciplines. So I was wondering if it is the case that the input is the same, but the output has to be increasing. So I was wondering what kind of effect it has on students, the quality of education, and then, yeah, the life quality of the faculty member. Thank you.
So the larger question of the implications, and that's the third question, I want to make it myself and really follow up on what was in the outline of this webinar, at the beginning. I mean, we've got this picture now of a fairly stable academic labour force, and that being a sort of somewhat supply driven in relation to market forces. And that being a potential block for executive leaders. Now, much of the talk about higher education, throws a lot of emphasis on the capacity of executive leaders to make decisions. The expectation is that they steer, they can reallocate resources, they can pick up new priorities, they are responsible for responding to a changing times. They sometimes have to take their institutions in radical new directions and so on. But the picture that which we now have here is that it's difficult to do all those things. So even when you've got an Arizona State University or an NYU, you know, with an executive leaders or leaders keen to really turn things in another direction, there are real blocks on their capacity to move the pieces of the Lego around to make a new shape. Is that the picture that we're in, or do executive leaders have more options, more scope than you've told us so far? So that's the three questions: future of tenure, implications for students, implications for constraints on executive leaders.
I'll let Matt go last, and I'll try to respond quickly. Some people think that the future of tenure is really bleak. Robert Kelchin, who is a very well-known policy researcher and analyst of U.S. higher education, has argued that he thinks that within a generation, tenure track positions will basically be gone outside of the Ivy League. I think that that's probably too optimistic isn't the right word, but that's too aggressive. I think that we will probably see a slow attrition in tenure lines where people retire, right? The faculty is quite old and are replaced with fixed term faculty, but that tenure will not wholesale disappear quickly, in part because executive leaders and policymakers who may want to do this just simply don't have the capacity to do it, or it would cost so much to do it that it's not worth it. But that there'll kind of be a stability with a little bit of over time decline. That's, you know, pretty conservative prediction. Individual faculty members, I think the expectations of work have changed. To Soyoung's question, I think that the amount of publication that tenure system faculty members are kind of expected to do now for tenure is not as kind of high as some of like the discussion makes it seem. That you know, most people are granted tenure, and so it's not as high as maybe people feel it is, but it is growing, and the work itself, in terms of student, you know, the amount of students you have, the amount of research you need to do, it's going up, and that stresses people. I think that's real, and it's especially real if departments aren't expanding, right, in terms of tenure faculty members. And then the last question, to your point, Simon, is I think that basically we've oversold, or administrators have oversold themselves, either because governments have asked them to position themselves this way, or because they've sold themselves to governments this way and governments like it, as people who can really do things, get things done. And they can get some things done, but they can't get nearly as much done as they want. Science is kind of self-organizing. You have argued this a little bit, or something like this, in the sort of global networks of science. And these are really difficult things to manipulate, like pulling levers, these complex sociological processes that unfold over long periods of time. And I just don't think administrators can do what they say they can do. But you know, they're paid like executives. They have executive type jobs now, and so they have to present themselves as executives.
Just to follow up, that we do see increasing book and article production and doctoral degrees with stability in employment. So that does produce the kind of effect that you were talking about the increasing inputs. The one caveat, I guess, is that on publications, there is a large increase in co-authorship. And so some of that we might be counting every time that you're one of 3 or 4 co-authors, especially when you get into some of those scientific disciplines with a quickly rising number of co-authorships. But overall, that is the story. On the tenure track positions, again, we're not necessarily showing a decline at these research universities. What we're showing is that assistant professors have always been a minority of departments, that retirements are slow. And so if you were to make these kind of changes in trajectory, it would take a long time because you would be only able to affect essentially the new hires in departments. And even to get, let's say, a change where a discipline is losing students, not publishing a lot, and not getting grant dollars, is still going to be a long while, even if a university decided to sort of let that department die. It would take a long time to get to that position. You do see a little bit more of the let's make a big splash when it comes to new fields. That is, we do see a few more where a university adds a lot of faculty over a 1 or 2 year period in a new program. But those are examples that you mostly know, areas like computer science, where or a sort of a new sub-discipline where those are created in full swoop. Other than that, we're not seeing a ton of change, which both means that university administrators don't have as much flexibility as they might hope to have or say that they have, but also means that some of the more depressing stories about the decline of academia either aren't borne out in our data or will take a very long time to come to fruition.
I want to thank you both. And it goes to show that how much you can get from a body of data. You can, once you start to just interpret it and think about what it means, contextualize it, look at it, especially longitudinally, you can talk about so much. And I think that you've opened up faculty data for us very well in the US. And of course, it's such an important system, and a system which affects the rest of us, both directly and indirectly, is in its role as a model and example. And the trends that you pointed to, while there's on the whole greater stability than in most other countries, are certainly ones which we see elsewhere as well. So thank you very much. I must apologize to Pepping. I'm sorry I had to cut you off when you came back the third time, but we are short of time in the Q&A and need to include everyone when we can. And we tend to run over a bit, but you can see by the way the numbers have dropped down to 41 from the high of 74 that people will really just want to stay the hour and perhaps a little tiny bit more, but that's it. So thanks, folks, and hope we'll have both of you back. Thanks, Matt. Good to have you on the show. Brendan's been here before, but this is your first time, and really good to have you with the international audience. I think people will now know about you and your work, and including your work in other domains, of course, and we'll take an interest in it. Our next and final pre-summer webinar is on Thursday in 2 days' time, and it's Tan Pham coming back again. She had a very well-attended webinar talking about employability issues for international graduates. She's now unpacking her central concept, which is agentic capital, and she's going to talk to us about that in relation to employability. She'll be with us, as I said, in 2 days minus 1 hour. Look forward to seeing you all then. Do come back also after the summer break in the UK. For us, that's basically August. Summer break started in a lot of other places. We'll begin again in early September, and we have an 8-part seminar series on racism and decoloniality in higher education with a great cast of speakers, US, UK, the world, lots of interesting themes, really strong program. So I think that, they'll be running for a month, twice a week, and that'll be a really interesting program, which will bear, watching again and again on YouTube. So do come back in September, but come back in 2 days' time. Thank you all for your participation today and for an excellent discussion. Bye for now.